Many of us go through cutting phases or aim to maintain a leaner body composition permanently. To achieve either of these goals, we know that we need to eat less calories. However, doing this is easier said than done. In this video, we will cover some strategies that can help trainees reduce calorie intake in their everyday life without having to track calories directly. The first concept to understand is energy balance. This has probably been repeated many times before, but its importance cannot be understated. Without understanding this fundamental concept, the rest of this video won't make sense. Energy balance simply refers to the energy we consume versus the energy we expend, usually quantified as calories. Essentially, we consume a certain amount of calories each day via food and drink, and we expend a certain amount of energy through our metabolic rate, digestion, and through movement. Depending on how these numbers balance out, will determine our change in body weight. If we consistently eat more calories than we expend, we will gain weight over time. If we consistently eat less calories than we expend, we will lose weight over time. And if we eat roughly the same number of calories to what we expend, we will maintain body weight over time. So to get significantly leaner and to maintain a leaner physique, we need to eat less calories. This will help lose body fat or maintain our body composition at a lower maintenance calories. Either way, the key to successful weight loss and weight loss maintenance is to be at a lower energy balance. This can be achieved through both exercise to expend more energy and through diet to eat less calories. However, the human body is very efficient at conserving energy, so it is actually quite difficult to create a significant calorie deficit through exercise alone. In other words, it is very difficult to out-exercise a high calorie intake. This phenomenon was described in this research review as the constrained energy model. This model suggests that as we increase energy expenditure through physical activity, we tend to reduce energy expenditure through other means, such as our metabolic rate and subconscious movements. So rather than physical activity having a linearly additive effect on energy expenditure, as seen in this graph, it is more likely that we see some compensation from other systems, as shown in this graph. So while doing more exercise will certainly increase energy expenditure, it probably doesn't contribute quite as much as we may think. So what this suggests is that diet manipulation seems to be a more straightforward and effective method to reduce the calorie balance equation. While there are exercise strategies to increase energy expenditure, we won't be exploring them in this video. For this video, we will explore some tips on how to reduce the amount of calories we eat. So why do we even need to discuss how to reduce calorie intake? Can't we just input the numbers, track our food, and be in a consistent deficit each day? Yes, this is certainly possible. However, this is easier said than done. Unfortunately, humans aren't robots, meaning we can't just plug in X and expect the results to be Y. We have physiological processes which try to keep us at maintenance. We have environmental factors which influence our calorie intake. We have habits developed over time, which may be good or bad. We eat for social reasons, not just when we are hungry, and our eating behavior can be influenced by our emotional state. So, although tracking our calories is almost a guaranteed way to reduce calorie intake, the reality is that most people cannot or don't want to be tracking everything they eat for the rest of their lives. This is not to say tracking food is an inherently bad thing. In fact, I think there are many positive effects that food tracking can have. I generally recommend that everyone should experience tracking their food fairly regularly for a certain point in their training careers. This will help you develop a better understanding of how much you are actually eating, which foods are higher or lower in calories, which foods are composed of what macros, portion sizes of meals, etc. However, I just don't think tracking is a sustainable behavior for most people from a long-term perspective. So, how do we reduce our calorie intake if we aren't tracking our food? This is where our strategies will come into play. Basically, trainees can implement certain behaviors each day to help limit calorie intake. So we aren't directly measuring calories, but these strategies can help us make better decisions throughout our everyday lives. If we make better food decisions each day, then we are likely to eat fewer calories simply as a result of our decisions. Over time, we want this to develop into long-term habits so that it becomes an almost automatic process, or rather less of a burden. In my experience, this is a more sustainable approach to nutrition and something that can be relied upon in all situations. Before we get into these strategies, it should also be noted that these strategies will work best if a trainee already has a decent understanding of calories and macronutrients. So if you haven't tracked food before and aren't familiar with what foods have what calories and macros, then I would recommend getting a good understanding of this first. Then once you are more familiar with this, these strategies can help with long-term diet sustainability. Let's now delve into these strategies and how they can help us reduce calorie intake. The first strategy that needs to be discussed is body weight tracking. While this isn't really a direct nutritional intervention, it is a very important behavior. We do need to track some form of metric to tell us if we are in fact eating fewer calories. And there is no better metric than our body weight. The good thing is that we can simply jump on the scale, record our body weight, and that is all we need to do. It is not difficult or invasive and gives us an objective number to tell us if we are on track or not. If we don't track our body weight, we don't really know if we are on the right or wrong track, at least over a short to moderate time frame. So this is an important behavior to implement because it gives us feedback as to whether or not we are in fact reducing calorie intake. I generally recommend for trainees to weigh themselves first thing in the morning, before any food or water, and with minimal clothes. This can be done every day if desired, but it only needs to be done 2 to 3 times per week as a minimum. So now that we have an objective metric to tell us if we are on track, we can now get into the nutritional strategies to help reduce calorie intake. The first of which is being conscious of food volume or energy density. This refers to how many calories a food has relative to its weight or volume. 2 different foods may have the same total amount of calories, but one food might be twice the weight as the other. Let's use an example to demonstrate this idea. Let's compare an apple with a donut. Per 100 grams, an apple has around 52 calories. A donut, on the other hand, has around 452 calories for the same 100 grams. So for the same 100 grams of donuts, we would be able to eat around 900 grams of apples for calories to be roughly equated. This is an obvious example, but it demonstrates the point we are trying to make. However, this becomes more relevant when deciding on food choices and entire meals. For example, let's compare the classic meal of grilled chicken breast, baked or steamed rice and broccoli with something like steak, fries and a salad. Both meals have a carbohydrate source, a protein source and a vegetable source, but the calorie density is quite different. As we can see, the chicken, rice and broccoli meal is around 574 calories for a serving, while the steak, fries and salad is around 1,388 calories for the same weight of food. This means we could eat around twice the amount of chicken and rice for the same amount of calories as the steak and fries. So as we can see, we are probably going to be more satiated by eating high volume foods even when calorie intake is equated. This doesn't mean we should only eat foods with the absolute lowest calorie density. It just means that we can make more informed decisions when it comes to preparing and selecting our food. A good general strategy would be to try and include a good serving of fruits or vegetables with each meal. This will help to consume a higher volume of food without contributing many calories. This is likely to keep us more satiated, reducing the likelihood of overeating. The second nutritional strategy is to consume a fairly high protein intake. This has many benefits for muscle growth and body composition, but for this video, we will be discussing its benefits for limiting calorie intake. The most notable benefit of a high protein diet is its effect on satiety. We generally find that protein tends to be more satiating compared with the same amount of calories from carbohydrates and fat. This will allow us to feel fuller throughout the day, decreasing our desire to eat. This was demonstrated in this study, which had subjects increase their protein from around 15 to 30% of total daily calorie intake. As we can see, without conscious effort, subjects naturally reduced total calorie intake by an average of around 440 calories per day, and lost weight as a result. This study suggests that increasing protein intake in our everyday diet is likely to result in a lower calorie intake without necessarily focusing on calorie intake directly. This may be due to a decrease in hunger and an increase in satiety from consuming a high-protein diet. It is generally recommended for trainees to consume a minimum of around 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Higher protein intakes than this may be additionally beneficial if trainees can practically manage it. The next strategy that can help to reduce calorie intake is to use our inherent hunger and satiety signals, often known as intuitive or mindful eating. This is where we manage our eating behaviors in response to how full and how hungry we are. In other words, we are more mindful of only eating when we are actually physiologically hungry and being aware of only eating to a place of satiety rather than eating until we are overly full. This can help us eat more in line with what our body physically needs for the energy expended throughout the day, rather than overeating due to social or emotional reasons. In most cases, this is likely to result in a reduction in calorie intake, as shown by this systematic review. It was found that 13 out of the 19 studies implementing mindful or intuitive eating strategies resulted in significant weight loss, indicating that calorie intake was reduced using these strategies. This is likely because subjects are more focused on their actual food intake requirements when focusing on these signals. So as a result, calorie intake is often reduced without specific focus on calorie intake itself. The next strategy to promote a lower calorie intake is manipulating meal frequency. This refers to how many meals per day we eat. Generally, we find that a lower meal frequency tends to result in a lower overall calorie intake. This may go against the common knowledge that a higher meal frequency tends to be very slightly superior for the muscle growth process. So it should be noted that there may be a small trade-off here. However, in most cases, the large benefits of reduced calorie intake from a lower meal frequency far outweigh the potentially minute benefits of superior muscle growth from a higher meal frequency. This enormous study, taking data from over 50,000 people, explored the associations between body weight change per year and various different nutritional factors, including meal frequency. It was found that those consuming 1 to 2 meals per day tended to see decreases in body weight over time, while those consuming more than 3 meals per day tended to see an increase in body weight over time. This suggests that if we limit the number of meals per day that we eat, we are likely to subconsciously reduce calorie intake too. This could be due to a variety of mechanisms, such as increased satiety from larger meals, having less food focus throughout the day, providing fewer opportunities to eat, or simply from having some sort of a structured routine. However, it is less important to understand the exact mechanisms because the outcome is that it tends to limit calorie intake, which is the ultimate goal here. The next strategy is manipulating our feeding window. This is similar to the previous discussion about meal frequency, but it more so refers to how close together meals are consumed. For most people, we generally find that if we condense our feeding window, we tend to eat fewer calories. In other words, if we eat our total daily calories within a 6-hour window, for example, compared with a 10-hour window, then we are likely to consume less food. This may be due to its effects on hunger and satiety. This study compared the effects of eating the same 3 meals within a 12 versus a 6-hour feeding window. It was found that the shorter feeding window tended to slightly decrease overall hunger levels, decrease desire to eat, and increase the perception of fullness on average throughout the course of the day. This means that we are more likely to consume less calories by restricting our feeding window. This doesn't mean we have to implement an all-out intermittent fasting protocol, it just means that we may want to condense our feeding window slightly. A good practical strategy would be to try and consume your first meal 1 to 2 hours later than usual, and your last meal 1 to 2 hours earlier. The next potentially effective strategy to help reduce calorie intake is to meal prep. This refers to having prepared meals readily available in the home for consumption. If we have high protein, low energy dense meals readily available, we are more likely to consume them rather than eating something else. This is because it is convenient and ready for consumption, so minimal time is spent preparing the meal. This is often a barrier preventing people from consuming a balanced, healthy diet, because it takes time and effort to cook and prepare such meals. Instead, people may simply pick up some fast food because it is tasty, convenient, and cheap. This doesn't mean we need to meal prep every single meal of every single day. It just means that it is a good idea to regularly have good quality meals available, which will help to eliminate the decision-making process. For example, when cooking dinner, maybe you can make a larger than normal quantity and pack the leftovers into containers. This can then be stored in the fridge and can provide a healthy, high-quality lunch or dinner for the next few days. The more readily available good quality meals are, the more likely we are to consume them, helping to reduce our overall calorie intake. And the last strategy we will discuss in this video is exercise. I know that we mentioned this video will only focus on nutritional interventions rather than exercise. However, exercise has indirect effects on nutritional intake too. When we have a high daily physical activity level, it helps to regulate our hunger and satiety signals. This means when we eat, we will feel more satiated from that meal and less hungry hours after the meal. Although most of us watching this video already perform weight training multiple times per week, we are more so referring to general physical activity, which is quantified using a metric like step counts. So although we may be weight training regularly, maybe our overall general activity levels aren't as high as we think. For example, this study found that subjects with lower physical activity levels were less sensitive to food intake, and those with moderate or high physical activity levels experienced greater satiety from eating food. This means that if we are fairly active each day, we will probably feel fuller when eating and are less likely to overeat. This means we are more likely to consume a lower calorie intake without consciously tracking our food. So to summarize this video, let's establish some practical recommendations. First, we need to understand that our energy balance over time will determine weight change. So we know that we need to reduce calorie intake, but this is difficult to achieve in practice. Tracking calories is one method to do this, but it is unsustainable as a long-term strategy for most people. Rather, we can focus on implementing strategies which can help us reduce calorie intake without actually counting calories. Then we can use our change in body weight over time as a metric to assess if we are on track and to make adjustments if necessary. Some strategies to help reduce calorie intake are to eat more low energy dense foods, consume a high daily protein intake, use our intuitive hunger and satiety signals, reduce our meal frequency, limit our feeding window, meal prepping food for convenient consumption, and to make sure we are being physically active. These strategies can help us reduce calorie intake without necessarily focus on calories directly. Rather, calorie intake will likely reduce as a result of changing our eating behaviors.